sha'alti meit Hashem. This chant, which is especially auspicious for this time of Elul, is a melody actually written by Krishna Das, and the text is from Psalm 27, which is traditionally chanted every day during Elul and also through Tishrei, through the high holidays, all the way through the end of Sukkot. So I want to look at these words that we sing. Achat sha'alti literally means one. Achat sha'alti, I ask. Me'et Adonai, or Me'et Hashem, one thing I ask of the divine. Ota avakesh, this I seek. Shivti bevet Hashem, to dwell. And this word to dwell, shivti, is the same root as Shabbat, the root for rest and for the seventh day. Also shares some letters from the word for seven, which is Sheva. Yom HaShvi'i, the seventh day, is the day of Shabbat and dwelling, where Bevet Adonai, in the house of the divine, Kol Yemei Chayai, all the days of my life, Lachazot Benoam Adonai, to perceive or gaze upon the pleasantness of the divine. In other words, to know directly, to perceive directly the sweetness of the sacred. Noam can also be sweetness. Ulavaker behechalo, and to contemplate or to visit its sanctuary, which traditionally is referring to the temple that existed, but on a deeper level really means visiting a sacred space. Now I want to look at a particular word. There's so much richness in this sentence, but I want to look at this second to last word here, ulavaker, which I translated here as contemplate. The word or I should say the root, which is bet kuf resh, can mean to almost to test or to examine something, and that's where that word contemplate comes from. But it can also mean visit, which might be the more plain meaning of it. Let's look at this word here. Ulavaker behechalo. It's the root, which is bet kuf resh. And this word has some interesting different meanings that don't seem to be related at first. Bikor cholim, visiting the sick. That's the sense of going and visiting to attend something, to attend a performance. That could be used in the same way. But this root, bet kufresh, can also mean bakar, which is cattle, or cow, or beef, right? Which all have the connotation of some kind of nourishment. It could mean beef that we're eating, but a cow can also give milk. So through meat or milk, which are the kinds of nourishment that in the traditional Jewish view are like the two polarities of nourishment. They're not supposed to mix because they are opposites of one another. Milk is like the nurturance of a mother giving milk to its young, and meat has to do with death and slaughter and blood. So they're seen as opposites, and it's considered spiritually insensitive to mix the two. And yet both of them come from bakar. And finally, with a slight change in vowels, boker means morning. Boker tov. So how do we integrate? What's the commonality between these different kinds of meanings, visiting, cattle, and mourning? Well, let's look at the meanings of the actual letters that make up Bet Kuf Resh. So Bet means house, literally. A bayit is a house. And it has the connotation of the house, meaning the temple that once stood in Jerusalem, which is referred to in the line of our prayer. Shivti b'veit Hashem, to dwell, to have Shabbat in the house of Hashem. Kuf, on the other hand, Kuf begins the word kadosh or kiddush, which means to sanctify something, to proclaim holiness. But in Kabbalah, the letter Kuf refers to the kind of holiness which is ordinary, which is in mundane life, like the holiness of brushing your teeth, the holiness of putting on your socks, right? There is a holiness that is not so dramatic or perceptible, but there's a sacredness that's in simple life just as it is. So Kuf, in a sense, represents the holiness that's the opposite of the Bet holiness. The Bet holiness is a special sacred space, a container that we create to intensify holiness. Again, Shifti b'veit Hashem, Shifti means to dwell, but it also means Shabbat, and Shabbat itself is a Beit Hashem. It's a kind of temple in time that exists only if you make it exist, meaning you have to make it special by putting aside ordinary, mundane things for the time of Shabbat and engaging in practices which evoke that sense of the sacred, like what we're doing right now. Reish is Reshit, which means the beginning, like as in the first word of the Torah, Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning God created. So it has the connotation of experience prior to conditioning, prior to becoming an adult, prior to getting beaten up by life. There's this freshness, this aliveness in the eyes of a baby, which we don't have anymore, on one hand, in the sense that we see things through the eyes of our conditioning. And yet, at the same time, on a deeper level, that bright, fresh, unconditioned consciousness that a baby has is something that we can tap into, because that consciousness hasn't gone anywhere. It's just that it has this other stuff covering it up, years and years of experience covering it up. But how do we get beneath all that covering? How do we circumcise ourselves, in a sense, to get underneath all of the accumulated conditioning to that fresh, bright holiness that's underneath? We have to do that, we have to move from the Kuf of ordinary holiness to the Bet of the special sacred space, the space of Shivti b'veit Hashem, which is Shabbat as a temple in time. So going out from our ordinary experience to find that morning-like brightness, there's that meaning of boker, morning-like brightness beyond the mind. And why do we do that? Because it is like bakar, it is nourishment, it is meat, it is milk, it is something that we need, but in the spiritual sense. It's a spiritual kind of nourishment. The physical nourishment of food is just a metaphor for that. And this brings us also to our parsha, which is Teitzei. This is the first line of Teitzei. Teitzei la milchama al oyevecha. When you Teitzei, when you go out, la milchama, to battle, al oyevecha, against your enemies, untano Adonai Elohecha biadecha, and the divine puts in your hand Vishavita shivyo, and you capture their captivity. It's kind of a strange construction. But let's look at this word milchama, which is the word for battle. Milchama can be seen as mem, lechem. Mem is mayim, which is water, and lechem, of course, is bread, as in hamotzi lechem min haaretz. So in this word, milchama, we have water and bread and water, as we would say it in English. In other words, underneath the concept of battle is the concept of nourishment, which, in order to obtain this kind of spiritual nourishment, which is that bright morning consciousness beneath our accumulated conditioning, we sometimes have to engage in a kind of battle with ourselves. Battle of momentum and conditioning and psychological unwillingness to put down the world and to enter fully into Shabbos. But if we do it, untano Adonai Elohecha biadecha, then the nourishment that we seek is given to us. It's given. It's like it's an act of grace. It comes to us magically almost. But in order for that to happen, we have to set the context. We have to do the necessary battle with ourselves to overcome that resistance to putting down the world and entering in to fully come to Shivti B'Veit Hashem, to have Shabbat in the sacred space of the divine. But if we do, then Shavita Shivyo, we capture the captivity, meaning normally we are captured by the momentum of our lives and our conditioning, but we can capture that captivity. We can overcome the imprisoning quality of life at this time, especially when we may feel somewhat imprisoned by the circumstances of the world. It's so important to remember that external bondage does not mean internal bondage. That there is a boker, there is an inner mourning, in a sense. Mourning, morning, like dawn. The rising of the sun is within us if we receive the opportunity that the tradition and the practice gives us. This is the full verse. One thing I ask of the divine, this I am seeking, Shivti B'Veit Hashem, to dwell in the house of the divine all the days of my life, meaning that every day there should be a time where we remove ourselves from the conditioning and the momentum and the responsibilities in order to connect directly with the sacred, connect directly with the source. And I hope that all who are hearing this will take this opportunity of the high holy days, which is a renewal of our practice, to take another step in your spiritual lives. And that could be, for example, joining me daily for meditation online and joining the other folks who are doing that so that we can make a sacred community of practice together. Hachati Met Hashem Ota Avakesh Shivti B'Veit Hashem Kol Yemei Chayai Lachazot B'Noam Hashem Ulevaker B'Hechalot Shabbos. Good Shabbos. May you be blessed to enter fully B'Veit Hashem, to fully Shabbat, Vayinafash, to rest and be refreshed. Amen, amen.